For as long as humans have walked the earth, something has been watching from the shadows, waiting, stalking, deciding when to strike. In the dead of night, under the canopy of ancient forests, beneath the murky depths of rivers, and in the endless abyss of the ocean, monsters have always been there. But were they ever truly monsters? Legends of bloodthirsty beasts have haunted our nightmares for millennia. The werewolf lurking at the edge of the village, the giant serpent swallowing entire warriors, the demon bear that steals souls in the winter cold. These weren't just stories. They were warnings. Warnings carved from real-life horrors. Man-eating tigers, vengeful crocodiles, wolves that learned our weaknesses and struck when we least expected it. But here's the twist. Were the monsters ever the predators? Or was it always us? Because while we told stories of demons in the dark, we became the most relentless hunter of all. And as the wild fades, as apex predators disappear, a chilling question remains. Are we still creating new myths today? Or are we becoming the monsters of our own legends? Bloodsuckers in the dark, the bat demon's curse. There's a universal rule of horror. Anything that flaps, scurries, or hisses in the night is automatically terrifying. Moths? Creepy. Owls? Unnerving. But nothing triggers primal panic quite like the flutter of leathery wings in the dark, especially if that sound is followed by an unsettling high-pitched screech. Bats, those tiny upside-down sky gremlins, have been haunting human nightmares for centuries. But where did our fear of these little night dwellers really begin? Why do we associate them with bloodthirsty monsters? And more importantly, are we actually on their menu? Let's take a historical detour, back to a time when humanity was less concerned with scientific accuracy and more obsessed with blaming random animals for their misfortunes. The legend of the vampire, the suave, pale aristocrat with a taste for necks, didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was stitched together over centuries, influenced by a mix of folklore, disease, and an unhealthy fear of things that lurk in the night. And bats? They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. How a small, furry sky gremlin became a creature of the night. The association between bats and blood-sucking horror stories can be traced back to Europe's darkest years, literally and figuratively. Before people had the internet to spread misinformation, they had good old-fashioned peasant paranoia. Medieval Europe was riddled with plagues, unexplained deaths, and the occasional case of someone waking up looking a little too pale. The logical conclusion? A vampire, obviously. But where did the flying part come in? Enter Eastern European folklore, where stories of the Strigoi, Nosferatu, and Upirs were whispered around firesides. These undead creatures were said to rise from their graves to feast on the living, leaving behind blood-drained corpses and widespread panic. At some point, people started noticing that bats, particularly the nocturnal kind, had a nasty habit of hanging around graveyards and old buildings. Add a little imagination, and suddenly the bat-vampire connection was born. Meanwhile, in South America, people had already been dealing with real-life bloodsuckers long before Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. The indigenous tribes of the Amazon had centuries of experience with the true horror that European folklore could only dream of: the vampire bat. Unlike their European counterparts, who were inventing supernatural creatures to explain things they didn't understand, South American locals were busy dealing with actual flying parasites that had a habit of creeping up on sleeping animals and sometimes humans to drink their blood. And so, when Spanish explorers landed in the New World and got their first horrifying glimpse of Desmodus rotundus, yes, that's the vampire bat's official name, and yes, it sounds like something straight out of a necromancer's spellbook. They lost their collective minds. Imagine coming from a world where vampires were just bedtime stories, only to find out that, in this strange new land, they were real. The Spanish chroniclers wasted no time in adding blood-drinking bats to their growing list of reasons why the New World was terrifying. And before long, vampire bats were forever etched into the global imagination as living proof that the undead walked, or in this case flew, among us. The science of the suck, how vampire bats actually feed. Now let's get one thing straight. Vampire bats are not the winged serial killers that horror movies make them out to be. For starters, they don't just attack anything that moves. Unlike the legendary vampires that go for the dramatic neck bite, real vampire bats have a more practical, and honestly kind of hilarious, feeding strategy. Picture this. It's a peaceful night on a farm in Brazil. A cow is dozing, completely unaware that in the shadows, a tiny furry ninja is sneaking up on it. The vampire bat doesn't swoop in dramatically like a horror villain. That would be inefficient and, quite frankly, rude. Instead, it lands quietly near its target and tiptoes, yes, tiptoes, toward the unsuspecting animal. Using heat sensors in its nose, the bat scans for the best spot to make its move. It then makes a tiny incision with razor-sharp teeth, licks up the flowing blood, and releases an anticoagulant that keeps the blood from clotting while it dines. If that sounds creepy, here's the kicker. The cow usually doesn't even notice. Vampire bats are expert freeloaders, designed for stealth. They only take a couple of tablespoons of blood at a time, which is barely enough to make a difference. It's basically the bat equivalent of stealing fries from someone's plate when they're not looking. And while they rarely feed on humans, it has happened. But before you panic and start wearing garlic necklaces to bed, let's put this in perspective. Most of the time, if a vampire bat nibbles on a person, it's because their usual prey wasn't available. Also, it's usually while the person is sleeping in the open, in rural areas where bats and humans coexist a little too closely. And even then, it's not like they're draining people dry. At worst, they're giving an unapproved tiny blood donation. Why are we so afraid of these little guys? Despite being adorably tiny, they barely weigh as much as a chicken nugget, and highly social, they even share food with each other, like tiny goth communists. Vampire bats still get a bad rap. Why? Because nothing terrifies humans more than something that drinks blood. It taps into our deepest, most primal fears, the fear of being preyed upon while vulnerable. The idea that something so small could take something so vital from us without us even knowing. That's pure nightmare fuel. But let's be real. If anyone should be scared, it's the bats. Humans have been far worse predators to them than they've ever been to us. Due to centuries of superstition, vampire bats have been hunted, burned, and even blamed for diseases they had nothing to do with. When rabies outbreaks happen, farmers often go on bat-killing sprees, wiping out colonies without realizing that they're causing more harm than good. Killing bats disrupts their social structures, causing survivors to scatter and potentially spread diseases faster than they would have otherwise. Meanwhile, deforestation is rapidly destroying their natural habitat, forcing them to adapt to new environments, including human settlements. So, in a way, we've created the very problem we fear. The more we encroach on their land, the more they have to turn to livestock, or occasionally humans, to survive. Final verdict: are vampire bats the monsters we think they are? Absolutely not. If anything, vampire bats are tiny, misunderstood weirdos who just happen to have a unique diet. They don't transform into caped villains. They don't want to suck your soul, and they certainly don't sparkle in the sunlight. They're just nocturnal opportunists doing what nature designed them to do. The real monsters, our own fears and superstitions. History has shown that humans are excellent at turning harmless animals into terrifying myths, and vampire bats are one of the biggest victims of that habit. If we stopped seeing them as horror icons and started appreciating them for their actual ecological role, we might finally give these little bloodthirsty furballs the respect they deserve. Until then, they'll continue their nightly heists, sneaking up on unsuspecting cows like tiny winged con artists. And honestly, that's kind of badass. The wolf that walks like a man, werewolves and reality. There is something undeniably eerie about wolves. Perhaps it's the glowing eyes that pierce through the darkness of the forest, or maybe it's the way they move. Silent, calculating, never breaking their gaze, as if they know something you don't. They don't bark like their goofy domestic cousins. They communicate in eerie howls, long and haunting, as if they are whispering secrets to the night. For centuries, wolves have been creatures of mystery, both admired and feared. They were once symbols of wild power, cunning and survival. But then something changed. Somewhere in the murky depths of human imagination, wolves were no longer just predators of the forest. They became something worse, something unnatural, something that walked like a man, but killed like a beast. From hunters to monsters, how Europe turned wolves into werewolves. The idea of men turning into wolves isn't some modern horror movie trope. It is one of the oldest nightmares in human history. Stories of shape-shifting wolves appear across different cultures, from the ancient Greeks to Norse legends to medieval France. But nowhere did the werewolf myth take root quite as strongly as in medieval Europe, where an unhealthy combination of religious paranoia, lack of scientific knowledge, and a general fear of anything that had teeth created the perfect storm for werewolf hysteria. Europe in the Middle Ages was, to put it bluntly, a terrible place to be if you were either a wolf or a weird-looking guy with a bad reputation. Superstition ran wild, and if people didn't understand something, they blamed the supernatural. Wolves, being both predators and occasional livestock thieves, were already unpopular among villagers. But when people began turning up dead, mauled beyond recognition, someone had to take the blame. The idea that a regular wolf might be responsible was too boring. Instead, whispers spread. What if it wasn't a wolf at all? What if it was one of them? By the 16th century, werewolf trials had become just as ridiculous as the infamous witch hunts. People were accused of transforming into wolves by making pacts with the devil, rubbing magical ointments on their skin, or drinking out of mysterious puddles, because apparently Satan hangs out in unfiltered water sources. Hundreds of people were tortured and executed under the suspicion that they could change into a wolf at will and attack their neighbors. But nothing was quite as disturbing or absurd as the case of Peter Stumpf, the werewolf of Bedburg. Peter Stumpf, the werewolf of Bedburg, and the most unbelievable trial in history. Peter Stumpf, sometimes spelled Stump, was a 16th century German farmer who might go down in history as the most unconvincing werewolf of all time. His story is a wild mix of paranoia, medieval justice, and some truly creative storytelling from his accusers. The tale goes that for over 25 years, Bedburg, Germany was plagued by brutal attacks. Livestock were found slaughtered, people went missing, and half-eaten bodies occasionally turned up in the woods. At the time, there were only two possible explanations for such horrors: A, a very, very aggressive wolf, or B, a literal demon-human hybrid, because why not? Naturally, people went with option B. Stumpf, an unlucky widower with a shady past, was eventually arrested and forced to confess under torture that he had been a werewolf for most of his life. He claimed that Satan himself had given him a magical wolf belt that allowed him to shapeshift at will. By night, he transformed into a monstrous wolf and feasted on human flesh, particularly women and children. Now, let's pause for a moment to appreciate how absolutely ridiculous this sounds. A magic wolf belt? Satan personally handing out accessories? And if this belt was so powerful, why did Peter Stumpf never run away before getting caught? None of this mattered to the authorities. Stumpf's trial was less about logic and more about spectacle. The punishment was gruesome. He was tied to a wheel and had his flesh torn from his body with heated pincers before being beheaded and burned. The whole thing was so over-the-top brutal that even medieval executioners probably thought, "Guys, this seems a bit much." Despite the obvious lack of real evidence, the trial cemented the idea that werewolves were not just mythical beasts, but real threats to society. Fear of werewolves exploded, and for decades after, any mysterious death in rural villages was immediately blamed on another shape-shifting monster lurking among them. Do wolves actually eat people? The grim reality of predatory behavior. Now that we've laughed at medieval superstition, let's get serious for a moment. Because the idea of wolves attacking humans wasn't entirely based on irrational fear. While the concept of a half-man, half-wolf terrorizing a village is nonsense, the fact remains that wolves are predators, and under the right or wrong circumstances, they can and will attack humans. The good news: it's extremely rare. Wolves are naturally cautious around humans and tend to avoid confrontation at all costs. Unlike big cats or crocodiles, which occasionally hunt humans on purpose, wolves generally only attack when they're starving, sick, or feel threatened. However, history has recorded some terrifying exceptions. In France between 1764 and 1767, a series of horrific wolf attacks took place in the Gévaudan region, leaving over 100 people dead. The so-called Beast of Gévaudan was said to be an abnormally large, aggressive wolf, or possibly a hybrid wolf dog, that terrorized entire villages, dragging off farmers, women, and even armed hunters. The panic was so intense that King Louis XV himself sent a professional wolf hunter to track it down. Another documented case occurred in India, where in the 1990s, several villages in Uttar Pradesh were terrorized by a pack of wolves that developed a taste for human prey, specifically children. Over the course of several months, dozens of children were snatched from their homes at night, leading to mass hysteria. Wildlife officials eventually trapped and eliminated the responsible wolves, but the psychological damage lingered. Despite these rare cases, the truth is that wolves don't see humans as natural prey. The biggest reason attacks happen: loss of habitat and dwindling natural food sources. When wolves are forced into closer contact with humans due to deforestation or extreme winters, their usual hunting patterns break down, leading to risky behavior. The real monster: human fear versus nature. The most ironic part of this entire story? While humans have spent centuries fearing werewolves, we have been far deadlier to wolves. In just a few hundred years, humans have nearly wiped out entire wolf populations across Europe and North America. largely due to irrational fears and overhunting. Wolves, once widespread, were exterminated in countries like England, Ireland, and most of Western Europe. Today, conservationists are fighting to protect and reintroduce wolves into the wild, proving that the real monster in this story was never the wolf. It was us. So, the next time you hear a wolf howl in the distance, remember, it's probably not a cursed villager looking for their next meal. It's just a wolf, singing to the moon, wondering why humans made up such weird stories about it in the first place. The snake gods worship curses and killers. If you ever needed proof that humans have a strange, complicated relationship with nature, look no further than our history with snakes. These creatures have inspired everything from divine reverence to absolute terror. They have been worshipped as gods, feared as omens, and in many cases blamed for just about every misfortune under the sun. Your crops failed? Snakes. Your wife left you? Snakes. Your neighbor sneezed on you, and now you have the plague? Obviously snakes. It makes sense though. Snakes are the ultimate silent assassins of the natural world. They don't make noise when they move. They have no arms or legs yet can climb trees and swim better than most humans. And the venomous ones? They can kill you faster than a bad decision on a Saturday night. But before we get into their more murderous qualities, let's take a trip back in time. Because before we feared snakes, we worshipped them. Divine, deadly, and slightly annoying. Why ancient cultures loved snakes? It turns out that before people started running from snakes, they actually thought they were holy. Nearly every ancient civilization had some version of a snake deity, which seems counterintuitive, considering most people today would rather walk barefoot on Lego bricks than encounter a live cobra. Take the ancient Egyptians, for example. They had Wadjet, a divine serpent goddess who was seen as a protector. She was depicted as a rearing cobra, ready to strike, and her symbol was often worn by pharaohs. Probably because nothing says, "I'm in charge," like a snake that could theoretically kill you on sight. Cobras were so respected in Egypt that killing one was a crime punishable by death, which must have been a real dilemma when one slithered into someone's house and refused to leave. The Hindus took snake worship to a whole new level with the Naga, a race of divine, half-human, half-serpent beings that lived underground and occasionally emerged to interact with the mortal world. Depending on the story, Nagas could be wise protectors, vengeful spirits, or outright monstrous killers. They were said to control water, fertility, and even entire kingdoms, which means somewhere in ancient India, there was definitely a king who lost a battle and blamed it on a giant, divine snake rather than his own terrible strategy. Even the Greeks, who were generally more into muscled warriors and dramatic betrayals, had a soft spot for serpents. They gave us Medusa, the original bad hair day. Medusa wasn't exactly worshipped, but she definitely made an impression. So much so that even thousands of years later, people still slap her image on Versace clothing like she's a brand ambassador. Meanwhile, in China, the dragon, a mythological creature that is basically just a really fancy, overpowered snake with wings, was seen as a symbol of power, wisdom, and good fortune. Unlike the West, where dragons were fire-breathing menaces, in China they were noble, wise, and sometimes even gave life advice. Kind of like your overly spiritual uncle, but with scales. But here's the kicker. While snakes were worshipped in temples, carved into statues, and embroidered onto royal robes, they were also still terrifying. And for good reason, because while some people were busy building temples for them, others were getting bitten. When worship goes wrong, the reality of deadly snakes. Now, let's get to the fun part. The snakes that made people rethink their religious devotion. It turns out that while some civilizations saw snakes as divine, many also believed they were cursed. And honestly, with good reason. While the gods were out there demanding offerings and blessing crops, the real living snakes were out there biting people and making sure that doctors in ancient times had the worst job ever. Take the cobra, for example. It's easy to see why it became the centerpiece of so many myths. The hood, the hypnotic stare, the fact that it hisses at you like it just caught you stealing from its fridge. But beyond its dramatic appearance, the cobra is one of the deadliest creatures on the planet. Cobras don't bite and release like some lazy, half-hearted venomous snakes. No, cobras envenomate aggressively. Their venom is a horrifying cocktail of neurotoxins that shut down your nervous system, cause paralysis, and if left untreated, can kill a full-grown human within hours. Some species, like the king cobra, take it a step further. They don't just kill, they kill dramatically. The king cobra is the longest venomous snake in the world and has enough venom to kill an elephant. Yes, you heard that right. An entire elephant. And then, just when you think cobras are bad enough, along come the spitters. Spitting cobras have evolved to spray venom directly into your eyes, which, besides being a horrific way to go blind, is also just incredibly rude. Imagine being a medieval warrior thinking you're about to fight a normal snake, and then it just spits acid at your face. No wonder people thought they were cursed. But venomous snakes don't hold a monopoly on terror. No, that honor is shared with the pythons, the silent killers of the snake world. Unlike their venomous cousins, pythons don't bother with poisons. They go for the old-fashioned squeeze you until your bones don't work approach. Pythons, particularly species like the Burmese python and reticulated python, have been known to strangle and swallow creatures significantly larger than themselves. There have been documented cases of full-grown men being eaten whole by these snakes, which raises a lot of uncomfortable questions. Like, how do you even explain that in an obituary? One of the most terrifying python-related incidents occurred in Indonesia in 2017, when a 25-year-old farmer named Akbar Salubiro went missing. When searchers found a massive, bloated, reticulated python, they quickly realized something was off. Upon cutting the snake open, they found Akbar completely intact inside its stomach. The whole thing was caught on video. And let's just say it's not a clip you want to watch before dinner. Snakes in modern times, still worshipped, still feared, still murderous. Despite thousands of years of evolving past worshipping snakes as divine beings, we're still pretty obsessed with them. India still celebrates Nag Panchami, a festival where live cobras are literally brought into temples and prayed to, presumably by people who are much braver than the rest of us. At the same time, snakebite deaths are still a massive global problem. According to the World Health Organization, around 81,000 to 138,000 people die from snake bites every year, mostly in rural areas of Asia and Africa, where access to antivenom is limited. The most common culprits? Cobras, vipers, and kraits, all of which, despite modern medicine, still claim thousands of lives every year. And yet, for all the fear they inspire, snakes are still crucial to the ecosystem. They control rodent populations, help maintain the balance of their habitats, and believe it or not, some of their venom is being studied for life-saving medicine. So, in the end, our relationship with snakes remains as complicated as ever. We've gone from worshipping them to fearing them to grudgingly admitting that they're kind of important. Whether they're gods, demons, or just really cool reptiles with questionable personalities, one thing is clear: snakes are here to stay. And honestly, they wouldn't have it any other way. The tiger's revenge, when man becomes prey. Tigers are nature's most dramatic murder machines. They don't just kill their prey, they make a show of it. They stalk silently, blending into the jungle like a ghost with stripes. Then, when the moment is right, they explode from the undergrowth like a furry nightmare, pouncing with a force that makes every other predator in the forest look like an amateur. Their bite is so powerful that it can crush a buffalo's spine in a single snap. And yet, for the most part, tigers don't bother with humans. That's the good news. The bad news? When a tiger does decide that humans are on the menu, it doesn't just kill one person. It kills hundreds. And once a tiger develops a taste for human flesh, it rarely stops. These tigers are not just predators. They become legends of terror, stalking villages, dragging people from their homes, and sometimes leaving entire regions too terrified to step outside after dark. And there has never been a tiger more infamous, more nightmare-inducing than the Champawat tiger, the most prolific man-eater in recorded history. But before we dive into that chilling tale, let's address the big question. Why do some tigers turn against humans? And more importantly, what happens when a tiger decides that humans are no longer just intruders, but prey? Why do tigers eat people? The science of man-eating. It's important to establish one crucial fact. Tigers do not naturally hunt humans. Unlike crocodiles, which will eat anything that moves, or sharks, which have a nasty habit of confusing people for seals, tigers don't see humans as part of their diet. So why do some tigers turn into serial killers? The answer is usually one of three things: injury or old age. A tiger that has broken teeth, a wounded jaw, or weakened limbs might struggle to take down its normal prey. A deer or buffalo can outrun a tiger, but humans, we're slow. We walk right into the tiger's territory, unaware that we've just wandered into an audition for its next meal. Loss of habitat. When forests are cleared for agriculture or cities expand into tiger territory, these apex predators find themselves with fewer hunting grounds. With their usual food sources dwindling, They might start eyeing the slow-moving, unarmed creatures walking around nearby. Accidental discovery. Sometimes a tiger kills a human by chance, maybe in self-defense or by attacking out of territorial instinct. But once it realizes that humans are easy to catch and don't fight back like wild animals, it may develop a preference for human meat. And that's when things get terrifying. Once a tiger becomes a man-eater, the rules of the jungle change. It no longer hunts in its usual way. It adapts. It learns our routines. It waits for moments of vulnerability. It realizes that humans fear the dark, and then it moves exclusively under the cover of night. No tiger embodied this terrifying evolution more than the Champawat tiger. The Champawat tiger, the most infamous serial killer in history. If you were to rank the world's deadliest serial killers, the Champawat tiger would be at the top of the list. This Bengal tigress didn't kill 5 people, not 10, not even 50. She killed 436 people. Let that number sink in, 436. That's not a rampage, that's an entire career in murder. The reign of terror began in Nepal in the early 1900s. This tigress, who had likely suffered an injury that made hunting her usual prey difficult, discovered that humans were a much easier option. Unlike deer, humans didn't sprint at the first sign of trouble. Unlike wild boars, humans didn't have tusks. And best of all, humans built their homes in open areas with 0 defenses. It started with a few isolated attacks. But as the kills mounted, the tigress became bolder. Villagers whispered tales of the demon tiger that could appear anywhere, at any time. No one was safe. It got so bad that entire villages were abandoned. People refused to travel alone. Those who had to step outside after dark did so in groups, carrying torches, banging drums, and praying they wouldn't hear the low growl of death creeping up behind them. But the strangest part, no one ever saw her coming. This wasn't just a tiger ambushing people in the jungle. She was known to enter villages, crawl under fences, and snatch people right from their homes. She wasn't just a predator. She was a phantom, a shadow with fangs, a creature that had evolved beyond fear of humans. The authorities had no idea how to stop her. Villagers tried setting traps, building walls, even poisoning carcasses, but nothing worked. The tiger's body count kept rising. Eventually, the Nepalese government had no choice. They called in the British colonial forces. The decision was made to hunt the tigress down, but every attempt failed. She was too smart, too fast, too unpredictable. So the government took a more drastic measure. They drove her out. Through a coordinated effort, Nepalese soldiers pushed the tiger across the border into India, where they figured she'd be someone else's problem. They were wrong. If anything, the move only made her more aggressive. Once in India, she rampaged through the district of Champawat, killing more people than ever before. The British colonial government panicked. This wasn't just a crisis. This was an unstoppable force, and that's when Jim Corbett entered the story. The final hunt, how one man took down the Champawat tiger. Jim Corbett was a hunter, naturalist, and expert in tracking man-eating predators. He had killed rogue leopards and rogue tigers before, but nothing like this. Corbett studied the tiger's patterns and realized that she had a precise method of attack. She hunted along riverbanks, near villages, never striking the same place twice in a row. She was not just a predator, she was calculating. So Corbett set a trap. With the help of local villagers, he staged a fake gathering in an open field. The idea was simple: draw the tiger out. The villagers made noise, lit fires, pretended to go about their day, while Corbett hid nearby, rifle in hand. And it worked. The tiger appeared on the edge of the forest, watching. But Corbett had planned for this. The moment she moved, he fired. The first bullet hit but didn't kill. The second bullet struck her shoulder. The third, a direct shot to the head. At long last, the reign of the Champawat tiger was over. Even in death, the Champawat tiger remained an enigma. Corbett examined the body and found her canine teeth were broken. This, he believed, was the reason she turned to hunting humans. Unable to catch her usual prey, she adapted. To this day, no other tiger in recorded history has come close to the body count of the Champawat tiger. She remains the single deadliest man-eating big cat of all time. But here's the thing, tigers are not villains. They are apex predators, yes, but they are also victims. Habitat destruction, hunting, and human expansion have forced more tigers into conflict with people. The more we invade their space, the more we increase the risk of another Champawat. And if history has taught us anything, it's that when a tiger decides that humans are prey, it doesn't stop. So, the next time you hear about tiger conservation, remember this. We're not just saving them from extinction. We're making sure that another phantom of the jungle doesn't rise again. Because when a tiger takes revenge, it doesn't settle for just one victim. It takes hundreds. The curse of the crocodile gods, Nile monsters and flesh-eaters. Of all the terrifying creatures to ever slither, crawl, or lumber their way into human nightmares, crocodiles have to be among the most deserving of their reputation. Unlike wolves, which are often misunderstood, or sharks, which at least have the decency to avoid humans most of the time, crocodiles are unapologetic prehistoric assassins. They don't bother with stealth or elegant tactics. They just lurk, wait, and then when the moment is right, boom. A snatch, a roll, and suddenly the victim is experiencing a very personal introduction to what is essentially a living dinosaur's digestive system. And yet, despite their well-documented habit of treating humans as floating buffet items, crocodiles have been revered as gods, protectors, and even divine punishers throughout history. Which, let's be honest, seems like a bit of Stockholm syndrome. Imagine being an ancient Egyptian farmer living by the Nile, knowing that at any moment a 16-foot-long reptile with the patience of a Buddhist monk and the appetite of a linebacker could drag you into the murky depths. And instead of fearing it, you decide, you know what? That thing must be sacred. This is the bizarre relationship humans have had with crocodiles for thousands of years. From worshipping them as deities to blaming them for supernatural curses, crocodiles have remained both gods and monsters in human mythology. And if you think that's just some ancient superstition, wait until you hear about the real-life killer crocodiles that have taken these legends and turned them into reality. Sobek, the crocodile god who wasn't even slightly cuddly. The ancient Egyptians knew a thing or two about deities that could kill you in creative ways. They had Anubis, the jackal-headed god of death. Sekhmet, the lioness who would happily rip your soul apart. And then, of course, there was Sobek, the crocodile god of strength, protection, and, ironically, fertility. Yes, that's right. The same creature responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other predator was also a god of fertility. Because nothing says romance like a creature that ambushes you, drags you underwater, and methodically spins you into submission before devouring you whole. Sobek wasn't just a minor god either. He had entire temples dedicated to him, including the Temple of Kom Ombo, where Egyptians actually kept live crocodiles as sacred animals. Some of these crocs were mummified and entombed with the same care given to royalty, which really raises some questions. Who was the poor guy responsible for feeding the sacred crocodiles? What happened when one of them got a little too enthusiastic about the whole godly treatment and decided to snack on a priest? Ancient Egyptians believed that Sobek controlled the Nile and could bless the people with its life-giving waters, or if angered, unleash crocodiles to feast upon the unworthy, which, considering how often Nile crocodiles actually did eat people, might have been one of the more believable religious punishments in history. Of course, the belief in cursed crocodiles didn't stop with the Egyptians. Many African villages today still believe that some crocodiles are not just animals, but spirits, either reincarnated humans or supernatural entities that seek revenge. And as crazy as that sounds, there are a few real-life crocodiles that might make you reconsider whether curses are actually real. The legend of Gustav, the 18-foot crocodile serial killer. If there is any crocodile that genuinely deserves its own horror movie, it is Gustav, the world's most infamous man-eating crocodile. For decades, Gustav has haunted the people of Burundi, East Africa, turning the Ruzizi River and the shores of Lake Tanganyika into his personal all-you-can-eat buffet. He is said to be responsible for the deaths of over 300 people, but honestly, that's just the confirmed number. Many more have gone missing, their bodies never found, just a few ripples in the water, a scream, and silence. Gustav is no ordinary crocodile. He is estimated to be over 18 feet long and weighs more than a small car. His size alone is terrifying, but what makes him even more legendary is that he seems to kill for sport. Unlike other crocs, which usually drag their prey into the water and devour them quickly, Gustav has been known to leave bodies uneaten on the shore, as if just reminding humans that they're on his hit list. Villagers believe he is not just a crocodile, but a cursed spirit. Some claim he is the reincarnation of an ancient king, seeking revenge on the living. Others believe he is a demon sent to punish humans for their sins. Scientists, of course, have a more rational explanation. Gustav is simply too big to hunt normal prey. His enormous size makes it difficult to catch fast-moving fish or agile antelope, so he's been forced to target slower, more vulnerable prey. And unfortunately for us, humans fit that description perfectly. Efforts to capture or kill Gustav have all failed. Hunters have set traps, shot at him, and even attempted to relocate him, but the monster of Burundi always escapes. He has been seen with bullet scars on his body, and yet he continues to terrorize the waters. Some believe he has survived for over 100 years, making him one of the oldest and deadliest crocodiles in modern history. And here's the real kicker. Gustav is still out there, alive, waiting. So, if you ever find yourself near Lake Tanganyika, remember, there are things in the water far older, far smarter, and far deadlier than you. As terrifying as Gustav is, he's not the only cursed crocodile in history. Many villages across Africa and Asia believe that certain crocodiles are not just animals, but spirits seeking revenge. In some parts of Nigeria, it is believed that crocodiles can hold the souls of the dead, especially those who died unjustly. If a person was murdered, their spirit might enter a crocodile and hunt down their killer. There are even reports of villagers pleading with crocodiles to release the souls of their loved ones, offering sacrifices to keep them from attacking. In Indonesia, the Dayak people of Borneo believe that some crocodiles are sacred protectors, while others are cursed executioners. If someone breaks a tribal law, they say that a crocodile will mysteriously appear in the river and take its revenge. Now, whether this is an actual supernatural event or just an extremely patient crocodile with good timing, no one is willing to test it. Even in modern times, these beliefs persist. There are documented cases of villagers refusing to kill man-eating crocodiles because they believe the animal holds the soul of an ancestor. This means that in some places, people would rather risk being eaten than risk offending the supernatural. Honestly, considering how impossible crocodiles are to kill, maybe they're right. Crocodiles have been worshipped, feared, and blamed for curses for thousands of years, and honestly, they've earned it. They are one of the only predators that have successfully killed humans on a large scale for centuries, and we still can't stop them. From ancient Egypt to modern Africa, crocodiles remain both gods and nightmares. Creatures that have outlived dinosaurs, conquered the rivers, and never stopped treating humans as an occasional snack. So the next time you find yourself near a riverbank in crocodile country, remember, they don't fear you, they don't respect you, and they don't need to. They've been kings of the water for 200 million years, and they're not stepping down anytime soon. Hyenas, laughing demons, and corpse thieves? If nature held a competition for the most misunderstood animal, hyenas would win by a landslide. They've been cast as the villains of the animal kingdom for centuries, portrayed in movies as sneaky, cackling henchmen or lowly scavengers that steal from real predators. But the truth is, hyenas are neither as cowardly nor as insignificant as most people think. In fact, they are some of the most successful predators on the planet, capable of both hunting in deadly coordinated packs and stealing kills from lions. Yes, from actual lions. Yet, despite their impressive skills, many African tribes have spent generations fearing them not just as dangerous animals, but as supernatural beings. Hyenas have an unsettling reputation. Their eerie, laughter-like calls, their bizarre half-dog, half-cat appearance, and their tendency to stalk the dead have made them figures of myth and terror. To many, hyenas are not just animals, they are witches in disguise, shapeshifters that prowl the night, and messengers of dark forces. And when you hear some of the real-life horror stories involving hyenas, it's hard not to wonder whether these beliefs might contain a grain of truth. The shape-shifting witches of Africa, why hyenas were feared as supernatural beings. For centuries, various African cultures have told stories about hyena men, humans who can transform into hyenas at will. Unlike werewolves, which are usually tragic, cursed individuals, these hyenas are often evil sorcerers who willingly change shape to terrorize villages, steal children, and cause chaos. The legends vary by region, but the common theme remains. If you see a hyena behaving strangely, it might not be a hyena at all. In Ethiopia, the Buddha people were rumored to be hyena shapeshifters, able to switch between human and beast at night. These people were said to possess secret knowledge of magic, steal corpses, and feast on human flesh. A theme that pops up far too often in hyena folklore to be a coincidence. In Sudan, the Darfurians believe that some hyenas are actually humans who use magic to transform and hunt at night, returning to their human form by morning. Even in Somalia, where hyenas are common, many believe that these animals are spirits of the dead, forever wandering and laughing in the darkness. Of course, all of this might sound like superstitious nonsense, until you learn that hyenas actually do dig up graves and eat human remains. Forget vampires and zombies. Hyenas are the real corpse eaters of the world. While most scavengers stick to roadkill and leftovers, hyenas take their love of decay to the next level. These animals have been known to raid burial grounds, unearth human corpses, and devour the remains. And no, this isn't just ancient folklore. It still happens today. Hyenas have an insatiable appetite for bones, which is both fascinating and horrifying. Thanks to their powerful jaws, they can crush and digest bones that other predators wouldn't dare touch. Their stomachs are so acidic that they can dissolve entire skeletons, including teeth. This means that when a hyena feasts on a corpse, it leaves no evidence behind. The person simply disappears. In Tanzania, villagers have reported hyena attacks on graveyards, where they dig up shallow graves and drag corpses away. In parts of Zimbabwe and Kenya, desperate families have resorted to placing heavy stones over graves, or even burying their dead in cement, just to keep hyenas from getting to them. Some cemeteries have resorted to hiring armed guards to patrol burial sites at night because, let's be real, no one wants their dead grandmother turning into a late-night snack. And here's where it gets even creepier. Hyenas don't just eat the dead. Sometimes they come for the living. The rabid hyena attacks of Malawi, when hyenas went berserk. If normal hyenas aren't terrifying enough, let's talk about what happens when rabies gets involved. In most cases, hyenas avoid humans unless they're desperate or starving. But when infected with rabies, all bets are off. The virus shuts down their fear response, making them unpredictable, hyper-aggressive, and nearly impossible to scare away. One of the worst rabid hyena outbreaks in history happened in Malawi in 1998, when a pack of hyenas infected with rabies descended upon villages and began attacking people at random. Normally, hyenas are smart enough to avoid unnecessary fights. After all, they're built for efficiency, not chaos. But when rabies kicks in, they become feral killing machines, biting anything that moves. For weeks, villagers lived in absolute terror. The hyenas struck at night, attacking farmers, children, even people sleeping in their homes. Victims who weren't killed immediately faced an even worse fate. Rabies has a 99.9% fatality rate once symptoms start. Many of the bitten villagers died horrible, agonizing deaths, unable to breathe as the virus shut down their nervous systems. And here's the terrifying part. This wasn't an isolated incident. Rabid hyena attacks have been recorded across Africa, and in some cases, entire villages have been abandoned because people were too afraid to return. In some cases, locals believed the hyenas weren't just sick. They were possessed by evil spirits, driven to attack by supernatural forces. Despite their terrifying reputation, hyenas are not mindless monsters. In fact, they are some of the smartest predators on the planet. Studies have shown that hyenas are just as intelligent as primates, capable of solving complex puzzles, working in coordinated teams, and even outsmarting lions. Yes, you heard that right. Hyenas regularly steal kills from lions, despite lions being larger and more powerful. A well-organized pack of hyenas can bully an entire pride of lions off a fresh kill, using their sheer numbers and tactical coordination to intimidate even the king of beasts. And unlike many predators, hyenas adapt to human presence. They learn patterns, memorize weaknesses, and even observe human behavior. Some researchers believe that hyenas may actually recognize individual people, knowing which ones pose a threat and which ones are easy targets. This means that if a hyena decides to hunt you, it won't just charge blindly, it will plan. Think about that for a second. An animal that laughs while it hunts, steals from lions, eats bones, and learns human behavior. If that doesn't sound like a real-life nightmare, I don't know what does. Hyenas have been demonized, worshipped, feared, and misunderstood for thousands of years. They are both scavengers and hunters, both cowards and warriors, both pests and apex predators. They can crush bones, steal graves, and sometimes even bring entire villages to their knees. But perhaps the strangest part of all, they seem to enjoy it. Their eerie, high-pitched laughter isn't actually laughter at all. It's a form of communication, used to coordinate attacks and intimidate rivals. But when you hear it echoing through the night, deep in the African wilderness, it's hard not to imagine that they're laughing at something else, something only they know, something we probably don't want to find out. The ravenous shadows, demon bears, and folklore fears. Bears are nature's paradox, fluffy, lumbering, and sometimes adorable, yet fully capable of turning a human into a protein shake in minutes. They exist in two extremes, either peacefully munching on berries or rampaging through villages like a walking catastrophe. For centuries, humans have both worshipped and feared these creatures, seeing them as divine spirits, vengeful demons, or omens of death. Indigenous tribes worldwide believed bears were more than animals. Some saw them as gods, others as shape-shifting witches in disguise. The Ainu people of Japan honored them with elaborate rituals, while Siberian folklore spoke of werebears, humans cursed to transform into monstrous beasts. These weren't just myths. They were desperate attempts to explain the brutal reality of bear attacks. Bears usually hibernate through harsh winters, but when food is scarce, they enter survival mode. A starving bear isn't just hungry, it's desperate, aggressive, and unstoppable. History has recorded terrifying encounters where bears, pushed to their limits, turned to hunting humans. One of the most horrifying cases occurred in Sankebetsu, Japan, in 1915, where an 8-foot brown bear slaughtered an entire village. It didn't just attack, it hunted. It tore through walls, dragged victims from their beds, and returned night after night. After days of terror, expert hunters finally killed the beast, finding human remains in its stomach. The monster had learned that humans were easy prey. But Sankebetsu wasn't an isolated incident. Across Alaska and Russia, bears have stalked specific people, revisited sites of past encounters, and even exhibited signs of revenge. Some believe they recognize and remember individual humans, and sometimes they come back. Bears are more than predators. They are calculating survivalists, opportunists, and when conditions are right, relentless killers. We may have once feared them as demons, but perhaps the real horror isn't folklore at all. For centuries, we've told stories of beasts lurking in the shadows, cursed predators, vengeful spirits, creatures born from fear itself. But as we unraveled the myths, we discovered something far more unsettling. The monsters were real. Tigers that stalk entire villages, crocodiles that remember their prey, bears that return for revenge. These aren't legends. They are history. And as we pushed deeper into their world, destroying habitats, forcing predators into conflict with us, one truth remains. When nature fights back, it doesn't follow our rules. Perhaps the real monsters were never in the dark, watching us. Perhaps they were simply waiting.